Now, all day I've heard experts and journalists complain, why have the Nationals done this? Barnaby Joyce! Why kick back like this on the Prime Minister's global warming plans? Don't the Nationals know that farmers would be winners of growing trees or solar farms or something, and cleaning up with government handouts is going to be a bonanza for them? In fact, there's been some research on exactly that, which I think you would need to know to better understand what really did happen today, because you sure won't hear it on the ABC. I'm joined by Daniel Wild, head of research at the Institute of Public Affairs, the man who did look into exactly this issue some time ago. Daniel Wild, thank you for joining us. You've done a study on exactly this point. Who is most hurt by our global warming schemes? And more to the point, where exactly do they live? Can you first start by telling us how a net zero policy, as recommended by Scott Morrison, would in fact hurt some Australians?
Well, Andrew, some modelling that we undertook earlier this year estimated that up to 653,000 jobs would be put at direct risk from a net zero emissions target, and that those jobs would be concentrated in regional areas and in industries like mining, manufacturing and agriculture. Now, interestingly, Andrew, we looked at where those job losses are located in terms of the electorates around the country. And what we found is that 6 of the top 10 electorates with the most jobs at risk from a net zero emissions target are held by Nationals members of Parliament. Now, what this means is that we have the Liberal Party and a small number of people within the Liberal Party from the inner cities of Melbourne and Sydney pushing a net zero emissions target that will not affect them and will not affect their constituents, but will affect the constituents of the Nationals party room. And that is the key reason why this leadership challenge and the change of leadership happened today, because ultimately, Andrew, the Nationals were going to be the ones that suffered the most, and regional Australians will be the ones that suffer the most under a net zero emissions target.
Okay, looking at your study, 6 of the top 10 seats that will hit hardest, according to your study, are National seats. The 3 top seats on this graphic here are all Nationals. They're the ones hit hardest of all. That's Flynn, Maranoa and Capricornia, all the National seats. All the seats in Queensland, central and southern Queensland. Why are they particularly vulnerable?
Well, they're vulnerable, Andrew, because they're so heavily reliant on those industries, agriculture, mining and manufacturing. But it gets to, I think, a much bigger issue that we have here in Australia and that we're seeing play out right around the Western world, which is this hunt for fidelity in political representation. We know in 2013, Tony Abbott won in a landslide watershed election rejecting a carbon tax. And again in 2019, we saw the repudiation of the agenda put forward by the Labor Party. But it appears that on issues like climate change, it doesn't really matter who people vote for. They end up getting basically the same policy. Ever since the day after the coalition won the election in 2019, they've been moving closer and closer to a net zero emissions target that will harm the mainstream Australians that swung towards them. You know, this is the movement of working class Australians, working class citizens around the Western world moving towards centre-right parties, but they're increasingly being betrayed by those parties. They're breaching their trust. We see it with Boris Johnson, who is pushing radical climate policy. We see it here in Australia. So the issue is really not just about economics and jobs, although they are very important, but also trust in our political system. And I think what this means at a broader level is that the Nationals are now becoming the party of mainstream Australians and the voice for mainstream Australians, because the Liberal Party is no longer reliable because of that very deep split with the inner city, you know, Wentworth, Kooyong, Higgins and Goldstein, these inner city seats that are driving policies where they're not going to be suffering the negative consequences is pushed onto mainstream Australians in the suburbs and the regions.
Yeah, I should add that of those 3 Queensland seats I named, they include where the Adani coal project is, that was so crucial in losing the Labor Party the last election, and also the part of the Great Galilee Basin, which could be underwriting our future, and Labor would be not trusted there. Another of those top 10 seats that would be hit hardest by the Prime Minister's global warming plan, according to your study, is, of course, Hunter in New South Wales, a coal mining seat held by the skin of his teeth by Labor's Joel Fitzgibbon. One, obviously, the Nationals could actually pick up the next election. I think that'd be their gain, they or One Nation. I think that really explains to me the rise of Barnaby Joyce, because in the end, I think Barnaby Joyce sounds to most voters like someone who has seen through this global warming scare, believes it, would fight for coal like he really means it. In a way that Michael McCormack, for all his great virtues, I think probably, well, I don't think he was persuasive on that front.
I think you're spot on there, Andrew. There's far more to gain and to be gained for the Nationals and the Liberal Party and the future of our nation by making this realignment take place. The key issue here, whether it's to do with, the Hunter is a very good example of working class area dependent on coal mining, dependent on jobs for their communities, that they are largely without representation. They're still, voting Labor, like you say, only by the skin of their teeth, but Labor is moving further and further away from being a party of the workers. And so the issue here, really for the future of our country and for people to maintain faith in democracy, is that we have at least one of the two major parties that will represent the interest in a reliable and forceful, enthusiastic way of mainstream Australians and working class Australians. I think the Hunter Valley is an exemplar of that issue, where workers there aren't quite willing just yet to let go of Labor, but they may very well do in the next election or two. But not if the coalition adopts a net zero emissions target. Then there's no point of differentiation between the two major parties. So there's much more to be gained for the coalition, electorally speaking, to shift its focus on the heartland and to truly endorse and embrace this realignment that is happening, rather than trying to hold on to these inner city, what I would call teal seats. These are seats, like I mentioned, in Kooyong and Higgins in inner city Melbourne, that are Liberal seats and have been safe Liberal seats, but are becoming greener and greener by the day and are pushing our country towards net zero.
And we didn't even mention, by the way, that New South Wales, their Labor leader there, lost her job in a by-election in that Hunter region only a few weeks ago, because the voters saw straight through Labor saying, oh, no, we really get it on global warming. We really get it on coal mining. We love coal. Look, our candidate's a coal miner, proud coal miner. They see through that, and Labor was smashed. And the state level, I think they could be cruising for another bruising on the federal level as well. So I think it's more likely to happen with Barnaby Joyce there. Daniel Wild, thank you so much indeed for your time.